a whole nother section of the game that we have to focus on, which is once people have finished their personal storyline, what are the things they're doing in our game world, and what is our end game? And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Eric to start us off.
Okay, so end game, yeah, that's something that the game actually ends in a single player game, and it doesn't in an MMO. There's an expectation that people can play an MMO forever, potentially.
Yeah.
And, we've talked a lot about endgame kind of in abstract about what our philosophies are, but we haven't really talked about it specifically. And so what we wanted to do, we've seen a lot of fan reaction where there are people who think that we don't have an endgame or that we don't have any of that stuff in mind, and that's not necessarily true. And what we wanted to do was to talk a little bit specifically about what exactly you can expect to do when you reach level 80 in Guild Wars 2. So, the first thing is we have this basic philosophy of we don't want you to have to play a different game entirely when you reach level 80 than the game that you played up till then. So we don't think it's right for you to say, hey, you can play the game and only have 5 people in your group up to level 80, and then suddenly you're going to be required to do these raids that have 80 people or 40 people or however many people. We don't think it's okay that if you didn't like doing dungeons before, that suddenly once you get to the max level, you're forced into dungeons and things like that. And I think that's where a lot of people mistake that for kind of lack of endgame in our game. But what we're really saying is that you can do the things that you enjoyed doing up to get to level 80 at level 80 still. And I don't know if you want to talk about some of the, so for example, let's say I really, really enjoyed doing the open world stuff. I really enjoyed doing events and all of that. So when I get to Ore changes a little bit from the rest of the game, right?
Yeah, and Ore is really distinct in that it's really focused on the events, and that's a big kind of structure of Ore. There are no renowned hearts in Ore because there are generally very few friendly NPCs in Ore, and the stories are really focused on these very large meta events that are tied around taking key locations in Ore and the progression to fight your way into Ore through these huge event chains that are massive amounts of players working together. So, the first map in Ore involves the players really trying to take 3 landings on the beachhead of Ore, and this is almost like storming the beaches of Normandy in a sense. You have sort of the northern assault path that is sort of the by sea and air path where you're firing golems that land on the beaches, and there's southern assault path, which is a whole nother meta chain where troops are progressing along bridges and pontoons and everything that have been built to get forces into Ore. And then once you've got them into Ore, you have all these different event chains where you're trying to take control of each of the big corrupted god temples for the gods that were set up in Ore.
Yeah, because Ore was originally kind of the center of the gods, like kind of Holy Land, way, way back in Guild Wars history. And so there are all those original temples built to Balthazar and Duena, and those have been corrupted by Zaitan. And so we'll get to see. I know they're pretty spectacular.
Yeah, they are amazing. And because this is such a really holy land, there are little god statues scattered all over Ore. And if the Oriens hold control of the giant god temples, all the little statues are activated and held by Zaitan, and they cause all sorts of crazy effects to go on. So roots will come out of the ground and grab you, and you'll be unable to use some of your healing abilities and different things depending on which of the little god statues you're around. And so the players want to take control of these giant temples and hold them because it makes the entire progression through Ore easier. The other thing it does is the final progression to get up to where the final dungeon in the game is has these little statues along it. And turning those off, holding the big temples, makes it easier to progress to get to that final dungeon at the end of the game. And that's a huge event chain that kind of progresses along the bottom of Ore to get all the way through to the end of this. And a big part of the game is going to be people constantly fighting to hold all of these god temples and holding them for all the players on their server or their world. And then once they've got those, keeping control of them while they progress and fight their way up to the main batttlefield and hold that entrance to the final dungeon in the game.
Yep. So you mentioned dungeons. That's really good. So how many, so people who love playing dungeons, they'll have dungeons at endgame that they can do as well, right? So how many of them are there?
There are a whole bunch of dungeons that are set up all across the game. We have 8 story dungeons all total, and then if you include all the different paths that you can take through the different explorable dungeons, there are actually over 25 different explorable dungeon paths that are available in the game. And many of them are set up to be level 80 only, and many of them are ones that you can go do at a lower level and come back to it and get sidekicked, get down leveled down to the level of that area, and then participate in that dungeon and still have it be a challenge for you, whatever level you are. And that's a big part of the core philosophy for the game is all the dungeons are always available at endgame. Once you get to the level that they're available to you, you can always go back and keep playing them.
Yep. Okay, and then obviously, if I'm a big fan of World versus World, or if I'm a big fan of structured PvP, I can go ahead and keep playing those. Those kind of keep going and going and going. One of the things that I think is always a big concern for people when they think about what am I doing at the top is rewards that they can get. So each of the things that you talked about has its own reward structure, like there are specific looking armor pieces, and there's specific looking gear that I can get from karma merchants and things like that from those event chains, right? And then one of the other things that I don't think we've talked about yet, but the other thing that you get from doing all of this content is you get experience. And once you get to level 80, so everybody's probably pretty familiar with the fact that you every time you level, you get a skill point in the game. And once you get to level 80, that actually doesn't stop. So what you can do is you can progress and get to what the equivalent of 81 would have been, and then it'll give you a skill point and then reset your bar back down to 0. This is really, really similar to what we did in Guild Wars 1, where after level 20, you could kind of keep gaining skill points. And then the cool thing is, for people who have seen the Mystic Forge, you can go to the Mystic Forge and you can use your skill points. There's a Sunspear refugee from Alona there who brought the djinn that's in the middle of the Mystic Forge over with her, and she'll give you items that you can throw in the Mystic Forge for skill points. So anything that you do in the game that gets you experience can get you skill points, which you can then trade for these items. Then you can throw the items in the Mystic Forge, and there are some specific recipes. Now there are some items that are like really cool kind of exotic weapons and things that are the equivalent of kind of the high-level gear that you can get in the game, and there are some fun consumables that you can use, and you can actually use some skill points to transmute materials into other materials if you're a big crafter and stuff like that. But I think the most exciting thing that you can make in the Mystic Forge, and we haven't really talked about these before, is legendary weapons.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so legendary weapons are basically weapons that take I guess you would say a really, really specific, large concerted effort from the user in order to get them. They require a lot of different components that you get from a lot of different places in the game, and a lot of those things are things that you can't just buy from another player. They're things that you have to do yourself. They're things that you have to accomplish yourself. So you kind of have to show mastery at different parts of the game. And legendary weapons, of course, are not any more powerful than kind of the top-level exotic weapons. In fact, each legendary weapon is based off of a very specific exotic weapon power-wise. And so they're exactly the same power-wise, but they look a whole lot cooler. And they're the sorts of things that if you see someone using a legendary weapon, you're going to know it immediately. Like, I think you've seen a couple of them. Do you have a favorite?
I think the bow that shoots rainbows out of it is pretty good.
That's a really good one.
Yeah,
there's a bow, the short bow, has a rainbow trail that it shoots at the end of it, and it's got like a unicorn head on the front.
The Iron Man one is cool. pretty incredible.
Yeah, that one is called the Juggernaut. That's a hammer. So the hammer looks like it's got a ball of like liquid metal in it that spreads to your character whenever you equip it, and you leave behind these kind of liquid metal footsteps, and so you kind of look like you're, Terminator. Your armor kind of changes. I really, really like the great swords.
Yeah.
So the great swords kind of literally look like you're holding a piece of the night or day sky. There are two of them actually, and then you can combine those two if you manage to get them into a single great sword that changes appearance night and day. And so you kind of got this like plane that looks like you're holding where you can see the night sky or the day, like a day sky in it. It's really, really cool. So these legendary weapons are really, really kind of really cool looking. They're, and like we said, there's no, you won't get a gameplay advantage out of these things. You're just going to look really cool, and people are going to be like, "Hey, wow, where'd you get that?"
It's pretty much the ultimate prestige gear. They're definitely extremely hard to get. And then the two great swords being combined into the one ultimate great sword is the hardest one to get of all of them.
Yeah, because you actually have to do it twice and then combine the two of them. So in addition to legendaries, though, like I said, there are things that are easier things to aspire to that people can constantly spend skill points on in the Mystic Forge, and so that is a big part of the end game. And the nice thing about that end game, I think at least, is that anything you do in the game that gets you experience is potentially contributing toward this end game. So you could go play world versus world, gain experience from that, and you can keep getting skill points, and you can use those skill points. Going and exploring and finding all the skill challenges in the world. I think it takes about 170 skill points to unlock every single skill for a particular character in the game, somewhere around there. And there are like over 200 skill challenges in the game, plus you get a skill point every time for leveling up. So you're going to have extra skill points. And you're going to want to spend them on these things in the Mystic Forge, not even just for legendaries, but for all kinds of different things. And so that's one of the things that we expect to occupy people. I think the big thing to take away about Endgame, this is something our producer Chris Whiteside said earlier on when he first started playing the game and we were talking about Endgame, is he said all he really wants from Endgame is he wants to play the game that he's sort of built a lot of friends playing, and he wants something to do with his friends. Yep. And that's really the important thing. It's not, a specific, leveling treadmill or specific style of raids. I think what people want out of an MMO is because an MMO kind of becomes a social hub for them. It kind of becomes, it's the place they go to relax with all their friends and all of that. So the important thing is just give them things to do. And there's an awful lot of things in Guild Wars 2 that help facilitate that. Like, the fact that as you level through the game, all you're doing is opening up more and more content for yourself because of the dynamic leveling system. That's another good point.
Yeah, I mean, that dynamic leveling system really, it just lets you go back and do, when you want to get your skill points and keep earning them for all these rewards, you literally can play any part of the game that you want. Whatever you're into, whatever you're most excited about, or whatever you feel like doing that day, you can go do that and get rewarded for it. And if your buddy makes a brand new character, it's not like a traditional MMO where you can't go play with them without making a new character also. You can take your character that you want to keep earning skill points on and go play with them and actually play the game that you bought and play the character that you want to play.
And then another thing that I think you talked about in a recent interview is support for the game after it releases. Like the fact that because of the way the dynamic events work, we can keep the game really fresh, maybe more easily than a lot of other games can, due to our content structure. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's one of the great advantages of our dynamic event system is we really have the freedom to go back and go in the world and tuck these little dynamic events all over the place that you never knew that they were there before. And we can take events that run more frequently right now, slow them down, and have them start rotating with new events that we're adding to the game. So you might go back to an area and see completely different events going on there than you had seen the last time with your character you've got or with a brand new character. And the honest truth is the better the game does, the bigger the live team is that's going to be supporting that stuff. And we're going to have an extremely large live team supporting this game. Our goal is for people to say that there is no game that gets better support than Guild Wars 2. We fully recognize that any MMO is a service. It's not just a game. And the day the game comes out is the day that's when you have to be ready to go as a service. That's when things really matter for the people playing the game. And so we're going to be there ready to go with this live team, constantly adding content all over the world, adding these new events and adding other things.
And then because of the way that our end game kind of works, which is gain experience, and the way that the dynamic event system works where you're